Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to you in real life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a child, my mom was a single mother, and we rented a house a little out of the city. We all slept in my mom's bed for various reasons, but mostly just because we were young and that's what we liked to do. One night I woke up to the most horrific screaming and crying coming from outside, and soon after someone pounding on our door. It almost sounded like they were trying to kick it down. My mom was up in a flash, telling us to lock the bathroom door behind her as she ran to look outside. We were all silent, terrified, and worried for our mama. The woman outside our door, still banging and screaming, was yelling, "Help me! He's gonna kill me! Please let me in!" My mom was on the phone with 911 in tears, saying, "I can't let you in, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. My children are in here. I can't open the door, I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry, hang on, the police are on their way." The woman continued screaming and crying, then suddenly it went silent. The police came and looked around the outside of our house, unable to find anyone. I was around 5 when this happened, and I still wonder what happened to that woman. My mom still feels guilty to this day about not being able to open the door to help her. Driving home with some friends late one night, we come upon what looks like a bag of garbage in the road. It was on the other side of a hill, so by the time I saw it, I barely had time to react and avoid it. We get to our destination a few miles down the road, and one of the guys says he wants to go back and look at that bag. Something didn't seem right to him. We go back and pull off to the side of the road, get out, and put flashlights on it. At that point, the bag starts moving. We did not expect that. It rolls around for a bit, and by this time, we know it's a person. It's groaning and making spitting sounds. We decide we should probably get it out of the road and start walking it around. Suddenly, it moves quickly and gets up. It's a guy, and it appears he is wearing a big garbage bag like a poncho. His face is pretty beaten and bloody, and he is not in good shape. We ask if he's okay, and he answers, "I have to get rid of it." He repeats this again, except this time he screams it. We try to get him off the road, and he runs the other way, down a ditch and through a field. At this point, he is moving like he's at speed or something. We decided that since he was off the road, we'd just let him go and let the police know what we'd seen. This one is a little simpler, but back in my phlebotomy pre-nursing days, a stroke alert was called in the ED where I was working. We follow a set order of procedures for every single stroke alert that comes in. My job is to get in, take blood work immediately, and do a fingerstick INR on them to assess the thinness of their blood. If they are on blood thinners, the number will be higher, and with the help, the doctor administer the correct dosage of TPA to the patient to try to stop a stroke. Anyway, it's pertinent that we get this information as quickly as possible. So I get to the room and push my way through the masses of nurses and doctors standing around and stick a butterfly needle into the vein after some difficulty locating a site. The butterfly flashes back, blood came into the chamber, and I stick a vacuum tube to begin the blood draw. The blood comes down the tube a few inches and then just stops. Confused, I reach up to check the site and adjust the needle to try to get the flow going again, when I notice the clamminess of the patient's skin. I look up at the patient for the first time and see their eyes staring blankly above, unmoving. And if you are familiar with death, obviously no longer able to see anything ever again. The patient was dead. I had just tried to draw blood on a dead body. I looked around at the nurse sitting at the computer. She catches my eye and says, "Oh yeah, they died in the ambulance. Sorry, we forgot to cancel the alert." I've seen plenty of dead people over the last few years, but for some reason, this one sticks with me the most as being unequivocally creepy as F. I was at an import car show one year. Me and my friends used to do this a lot. We would buy alcohol, take off a day or two from work, and go in and chip in on a hotel party the night before, go to the car show with our cars, and do the same thing the next night. Well, we were out at the hotel one night, and I needed cigarettes. So my buddy lets me drive his car right down the road to a gas station. As I'm walking into the gas station, I hear yelling, an engine, and I look back and hear a terrible noise. And I see this woman flying through the air and a silver Lexus just hauling ass away. This woman flew 10 to 12 feet vertically. The car practically jumped a hill speeding away from her. It was crazy. So a crowd gathers away from her, and my friend walks out of the gas station with the cigarettes, and I'm like in shock. I was like, dude, come check this out. You just missed the craziest thing I've ever seen. And told him the story. We were both like, holy F. We were kind of high and got the courage to go around everyone and check it out. Well, I was like 20 feet away, and there was blood running down the street by my feet. It was effing crazy. We kept walking closer, and it was like something out of a horror movie. It looked like someone took a spoon and carved out a part of her head. There was a crowd, and I could hear cops and ambulances coming, so we bailed. I couldn't even enjoy the rest of the night. Plus, I felt like shit for being too high to run and help, because usually in situations like this, I'm completely fine. It was just wild. Effing wild. Sorry for how terribly this was typed out, but it was definitely one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. When I was in college in Oregon, I went scuba diving in a small freshwater lake that was spring-fed and pretty deep. The spot was also popular because one side had a high cliff and a waterfall, so people would dive in off the rocks. As I was exploring the bottom, I saw something white ahead of me in the murky waters, and getting closer, I realized it was a person lying face down on the bottom. He was wearing a diving mask, so my first thought was he was trying to see how long he could hold his breath. But when I got even closer, I could see there were crayfish in his hair. To this day, I vividly remember the feeling of what felt like a hand pulling me away from him, but what felt like another hand pulling me closer. The feeling seemed like it went on forever, but I know it was only a few seconds. I pulled him up off the bottom, got my arm around his chest, and took him to the surface, where I yelled for help. Lots of folks jumped in and helped me get him to the shore, and we started CPR. It took paramedics about 20 minutes to get there, and during that time he never showed any signs of life. Then they loaded him into an ambulance and took him away. Later that evening, a state trooper called to let me know that he never regained consciousness. It turned out that he was there with friends, but they got separated, and he must have hit his head diving in. Trooper also told me the guy's half-brother had drowned in the same spot almost exactly a year prior. Every once in a while, I'll dream about it, even though it was more than 20 years ago. When I think about scuba diving, obviously there's some inherent risk to anything, but under the water, right? It's just peaceful and calm and just breathing and everything's okay. And then to see another human when you don't expect it, especially in cloudy, murky water, it's got to be jarring. And the fact that the person was not alive is even more wild. Crazy. When you're not expecting it. One of the first homicides I processed as a crime scene tech was a bad one. The victim was an elderly lady who lived alone in her house in a somewhat roughed up neighborhood, but their particular street was an area still largely occupied by owners rather than renters, and most were older and had been neighbors for a long time and watched out for each other. Neighbors hadn't seen this lady in a couple of days and went over to check on her. They ran into the guy who had been living in her basement apartment as he was leaving. He said the lady wasn't feeling well and was sleeping. He was squirrely and left immediately. The neighbors tried knocking on the door, but no answer. The curtains were all shut, which was weird for the middle of the afternoon. They left, but were so bothered that they called police to do a welfare check. Police came out, and one of the neighbors was able to let them in through the garage. Went upstairs and found out the lady, brutally battered. He had used an old school heavy landline phone, the real Bell-Tel kind, that is heavy, not the cheap flimsy ones that replaced them in the 90s. She was barely alive, and he had probably been down since the night before. She was transported to the hospital, but never regained consciousness and died the next day. I was called out to process since it was likely going to turn into a homicide. By the time I finished with the upstairs, the detectives had a search warrant for the downstairs apartment, and we went in there. I was taking pictures of the drug paraphernalia all over the place. He was a crackhead. And the detectives found bloody clothing stuffed in the bottom shelf of the fridge, which later turned out to be the victim's blood. There was one area to the side of the little kitchenette that looked weird to me. Kitchen table shoved over to the wall, but kitchen chairs in a rough circle in the middle of the floor. Cheap dollar store, full-length mirror propped on two of the chairs. Butter holder, stick, not tub kind, from the fridge left out on the counter, looking like someone had been eating butter by the handful. Ugh. Finger marks in the butter and a scoop of it missing. I was perplexed, but started working my way around, taking photos of it all. Then I noticed a white substance on the seat of one of the chairs and a little splashed on the mirror, and realized that the asshole had gotten all worked up beating the woman upstairs and had run back down to his apartment to jerk off while watching himself in the mirror. Upstairs, the woman's clothing had been in disarray on her lower body. She had been wearing pants, and they had apparently been pulled off her and used to tie her hands. Her underwear was down at her knees, but it couldn't have happened in just trying to get the stockings off. But after I saw downstairs and realized what it was, I was pretty sure he had at least tried to awe her. She was 89 years old. The neighborhood loved her. She was kind, cooked for anyone who was hungry, and had been a safe haven for neighborhood kids whose own households were being ravaged by the crack epidemic. She had let the man who killed her stay in the apartment in exchange for some repair work and paintings on the outside of the house. Learned later he was homeless and claimed to be getting clean from his crack habit, but either lied or relapsed. The first court case I ever testified on. I was furious that the basement photos of his kitchen area were all excluded, too inflammatory, and it was treated as a simple robbery that led to homicide. There was no conclusive proof of assault, so no charges there. He did go to prison for life, without parole anyway though. I will never forget the way my heart and stomach flipped over when I was staring at his masturbation setup, and it clicked into place what I was looking at. A year ago, 16-year-old me had to call 911 while doing CPR and using EpiPens on my mother, who was in and out of consciousness. We were on the fire department there. Also, the dispatcher happened to be another volunteer in the FFs too, so I knew him. It was good to hear his voice at the time, and I have had a lot of various medical training. So I begged her and kept her from choking on her spit while she was in and out of consciousness, waiting on the ambulance to show up. FD sent first responders that got there first, while the EMT, fire department captain, put the AED on her, and the other two, the battalion chief and his kid, the rookie, stood around making sure people outside weren't crowding the door, the apartment complex, and made room for the ambulance. Not a clue if it was an allergic reaction to a bite or sitting. We were just outside or anything like that, or just a fluke thing that happened. But she's fine now. So why this was disturbing to me is not that I watched this happen to my mother or helped save her. It's not that she randomly stopped breathing and passed out while in the hallway and having to drag her limp body into the living room, not having to explain this to 911, Not that we don't know why this happened. Why I find this disturbing, most of all, is beyond everything else. I was completely calm. My mother and I have a decent relationship. It's just us two. Bad marriage with stepfather. Half-brother already moved out, and full brother lived with my father. Living together, and she's essentially all I have. And I was completely calm and collected while dealing with this. Even taking one of the responders' role in the scene. Backing my mother. I earned a bit of respect from the other people around the fire department after too. I was the senior junior in the department and took on roles leading other juniors and teaching and training more. It was good, but I'm still afraid and thrown off by how effortless that situation was for me. It should have been made me shaken up, worried and frantic, right? My lack of these emotions when all of this was going on just makes me feel like there's something not right with me in the head. But I'm perfectly fine, aren't I? It makes me think that sometimes I was sad to leave that department. A lot of good people were there.